Johnny Cash and Elizabeth Taylor. Johnny was born the 26th of February 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas. Elizabeth was born the 27th of February 1932 in London, England. As you can see, both of them had a triple conjunction of Mars, Mercury, and the Sun in Pisces. And they weren't born too far apart in time. His moon was at 7 degrees Scorpio and hers was at 15 degrees Scorpio. Another very interesting distinction between them is that they both have Venus-Uranus conjunctions in Aries, but in Johnny's case, Venus came before Uranus, and in Elizabeth's, Venus came after Uranus. It's also interesting that they had that triple conjunction in Pisces is opposite Neptune. These are two very Neptunian figures. Johnny Cash was someone who was on Sun Records in the 50s, so he knew Elvis and Roy Orbison. And then in the 60s, he's with the folk movement, Newport Folk Festival, Bob Dylan's best friend, all that stuff. But he was also Billy Graham's best friend. You know, who's friends with Billy Graham and Bob Dylan? I mean, how does that happen? And then by the end of his career, he's making these beautiful records with covers of Depeche Mode and Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden songs. His life story touches on a sort of universality of music and pop culture, and he could just fit in everywhere, and he was that kind of man. And Elizabeth also, I mean, obviously Neptunian in the sense that she's a glamorous movie star who owned more diamonds than Cleopatra, the woman she played. While she was certainly a diva with a certain amount of attitude, she was a genuinely likable person who had a lot of friends and a wide variety of friends. Who else is friends with Michael Jackson and Ronald Reagan? You know, again, you're seeing that really broad appeal. We're going to be looking at Mars retrograde, but also some conjunctions. I'll just run over a few details relating to Mars retrograde. Mars stations retrograde approximately every 26 months. The retrograde period itself lasts about 3 months. Another very interesting feature about Mars retrograde is not a lot of people realize. The cycle is peculiar in that Mars always goes retrograde in the tropical signs of Cancer, Leo, and Virgo every 15 to 17 years. But when it comes to the other signs, it can skip them over long periods of time. For example, the last time Mars was retrograde in Aquarius was 1971, and before that it was 1939. Mars was retrograde in Pisces back in 2003, and that had been the first time since 1956, and before that I think 1924. And in the case of certain people, they might only live through 1 or 2 Mars retrogrades in their sun sign or their moon sign or what have you over the course of their lives. The 30th of June, 1956, Mars is at 13 Pisces. Elizabeth Taylor was married to an older man who's already her second husband. But we all know Elizabeth's going to have quite a few husbands over the course of her life. But this is the day that she meets the future husband number 3, who is going to be one of the important loves of her life, Mike Todd. They meet on a yacht, and then they wind up going to a few cocktail parties. And over the course of these next couple of months, a romance is going to develop, and she's going to leave her husband and get a quickie divorce eventually and marry Mike Todd. They're going to have a child together, and then he's going to die in a plane crash. And then things get really interesting, but I won't go there. But the point being that she is meeting one of these truly important loves of her life as the first Mars retrograde in Pisces of her life ever occurs. Just a week later, the 7th of July, 1956, in Nashville, Johnny Cash plays the Grand Ole Opry for the first time. And while at the Grand Ole Opry, he meets the Carter family, who he used to listen to on the radio. And he meets a very lovely young lady named June Carter. And they're both married to other people, and they're going to be sort of casual friends for a long time. Eventually, she will be his wife and his one true love. But this is just opening the door. They meet this time at the beginning of July. Again, Mars is in Pisces, slowing down to its first retrograde phase of Johnny's life. And then he sees her again at the Grand Ole Opry at the end of this month, and he tells her, someday I'm going to marry... Oh, wait, I better do a Johnny Cash. Someday I'm going to marry you. You know, that kind of thing. Just as he met June, transiting Jupiter was at 0 Virgo. You see that? I'm doing a little diversion here because I spotted something really interesting that I want to show you. It has to do with just Mars, generally speaking, in Pisces, opposite Jupiter in Virgo. Now, as that Mars in Pisces would go retrograde, Jupiter, of course, would keep advancing and they'd be in opposition. And it's at this point that I Walk the Line gets released over the course of this Mars retrograde and becomes his first big hit. So he's also just becoming a big star at the same time. As that Jupiter in Virgo advances, crossing over his Neptune opposite his big Pisces stellium, and that Mars retrograde is happening. And that's especially interesting because a little while later, In 1968, after Johnny's career has sort of risen and fallen and risen and fallen, he makes one of his great comebacks. This is a man who made quite a few great comebacks in his life. But one of the great comebacks is his Folsom Prison concert. One of his very first recordings was the Folsom Prison Blues, and this was a concert he actually performed for a prison audience. He recorded a live album. Mars was not retrograde, but it was there in early Pisces, touching off his stellium, and it's opposite Jupiter in Virgo. It's a full 12 years after he had that first hit with I Walk the Line. But there's something about Mars in Pisces and Jupiter in Virgo that does something in Johnny's life, because it only happened 3 times. It happened in 1956, it happened in 1968, and then it happened at the very next Mars retrograde in Pisces, which is when Johnny died on the 12th of September 2003 in Nashville. You can see that this is the only other time in Johnny's life that Mars went retrograde in Pisces, aside from when he met June Carter and had the big hit I Walk the Line in 1956. And you can see, once again, Jupiter there in early Virgo.
Didn't they pass close to each other, too?
Yeah, June died the previous May.
Yeah.
Or did May die the previous June? No, June died the previous May. But let's get back to Elizabeth. I'm going to talk about some conjunctions of Sun and Mars in Pisces. These aren't quite as rare as the retrogrades, but they're still quite rare. They occur about every 15 to 17 years. She was born, of course, with the Sun and Mars in the same sign. And on the 6th of March, 1949, she met her first fiancé. This is a woman, of course, who's going to wind up having 8 marriages, 7 husbands. This is a man that she never wound up marrying, but she was engaged to him for 6 months. So it's sort of like a practice run, I guess you could say. She was young. She had just turned 17. She's a big movie star. She knows nothing about romance. Of course, one day she's going to be sort of the world's expert. And you can see that the Sun was conjunct Mars at 13 to 15 Pisces when this romance began. Now, let's jump ahead 15 years. I wonder what Elizabeth's going to be doing 15 years from now. Oh yeah, that's right. She's going to be marrying Richard Burton, her 5th husband. They flew to Montreal for the wedding because Quebec's divorce law was a little bit different. But Richard Burton is the other great love of her life, along with Mike Todd. And this wedding occurred just after a Sun-Mars conjunction in Pisces. You can see there at the bottom, Mars was at 19 Pisces, the Sun was at 25 Pisces. But the Sun-Mars conjunction doesn't just have to do with her love life. There are some other interesting little milestones involving this conjunction relative to her life. For instance, in 1981, not long after there had been a conjunction of Sun and Mars, I think the conjunction itself had been in a very late Aquarius, but they're still very close together there in early Pisces. On this day, the 27th of February 1981, she made her stage debut in the play Little Foxes. She had never been a stage actress, but this was sort of her way. You know, the movie career was waning down now, and she thought she would try something new. So professionally, this is an important milestone for her. 15 years after this, she's now mostly making her income selling perfume. As the Sun and Mars were conjunct in Pisces, CBS had this Liz Night thing where she appeared in 4 consecutive sitcoms. This was one of the best ratings nights CBS had that year. So that was that Sun Mars, and then lo and behold, I hate to bring up the sad things in life, but Elizabeth died on the 23rd of March 2011. It was a little after a Sun-Mars conjunction in Pisces, but she'd been in the hospital for well over a month at this point, so that whole gradual dying process for her occurred when the Sun and Mars were conjunct in Pisces, even though she did actually pass a little bit after the conjunction.